Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome again to US Modernist Radio. Join George Smart and Frank King as they talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. Show your support by visiting US Modernist's massive mid-century modern archives at usmodernist.org. Or join our newsletter list at ncmodernist.org. Today, you'll learn about two of the most iconic modernist houses in the world, Frank Lloyd Wright's Fallingwater and the Pierre Koenig Stahl House, with guest Shary Stahl Grunwald and Denise Miner. And now, the guys banned from Burning Man for not setting things on fire, George Smart and Frank King.
Hey, dude, I'm sorry. I thought an event called Burning Man was just plain common sense to take a fire extinguisher. Gotta rename the event Pyrapalooza. Come on.
Sure.
Support for US Modernist Radio comes from the sainted Sarah Sonk of Mod Homes Realty, a lovely single lady who's into Katy Perry, Stranger Things. Oh, man, I love that show. Organic, free-range, cruelty-free, fair trade, ecologically sustainable Cool Ranch Doritos.
Yeah.
And any furniture that involves steel. She knows modernist design like Joe Biden knows Amtrak. You can reach her at modhomesrealty.com or 919-601-7339.
There are some great modernist houses, and then there are some houses that just cannot be captured in a photo or a video or even a 3D rendering. These are the houses that not only captured the public's imagination at the time of construction, but continue to amaze decades later. Fallingwater is considered to be Frank Lloyd Wright's greatest residential work. Thanks to a tip from a former student, at age 67, he designed Fallingwater in 1937. The house was designated a National Historic Landmark in 1966, and Time magazine called it Wright's most beautiful job. It continues to attract millions of people since being transferred to the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, and in 1991, the AIA named Fallingwater the best all-time work of American architecture. One of our guests today is Denise Miner, public tour supervisor at Fallingwater. She's been associated with the house in some way almost all her life and has worked there as a guide for more than 30 years. Her grandfather and two uncles were part of Fallingwater's construction and worked for owner Edgar Kaufman Sr. She appears in the movie Frank Lloyd Wright's Fallingwater and also Saving Fallingwater. We have taken over 200 people from North Carolina to Fallingwater in the last 8 years, and Denise is the Obi-Wan Kenobi of Fallingwater, training their team of wonderful guides. Welcome, Denise.
Well, thank you so much. I am so flattered.
You're the best, Denise. We love you.
That's a sign of a good intro.
Yeah. However, there ain't no party like a West Coast party, and in L.A., there's a house that's not only iconic, it's a true Hollywood movie star. Former football player Buck Stahl created the vision for the Stahl House, a.k.a. Case Study House 22, designed by Pierre Koenig. The two-bedroom house has a tremendous wraparound view and was made famous by a Julius Schulman photograph. It has starred in many movies: Smog, The First Power, The Marrying Man, Karina, Playing by Heart, Why Do Fools Fall in Love, very prominently in Galaxy Quest, which is a Star Trek spoof.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think that's where the aliens had their base.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
The 13th Floor, Nurse Betty, Where the Truth Lies. TV shows include Adam 12. That goes back a little ways. Emergency and Columbo. Plus, music videos for ATB and Wilson Phillips. In 1999, the house was declared a Los Angeles Historic Cultural Monument. And in 2007, the AIA listed the Stahl House as one of the top 150 structures in America, only one of 11 in Southern California, and the only privately owned home on the list. we have with us today Shary Stahl Grunwald, who grew up in the house and administers the property with her brother Bruce. Welcome, Shary.
Welcome. Thank you. And thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, yes.
And it is quite an intro. Thanks.
So we're pleased here to have the two first ladies of iconic residential architecture in America. These houses continue to attract hundreds and, in some cases, thousands of visitors every year. Shary, I want to start with you. How did your dad come up with this idea and sell an architect on it? Because I imagine most architects wouldn't touch this kind of project, which is a house kind of hanging on the side of a cliff in L.A.
Right. Actually, he had trouble finding an architect that would do what he wanted or to build what he wanted. I know that the first two that he interviewed basically told him that the lot was unbuildable. You can't build here, and what you want is unbuildable. And then he found Pierre Koenig, who was young at the time, USC, and was gung-ho and wanted to take on this project, and then it became the Stahl House. He had the, I'm sorry, I'm trying to think of the word.
So he had the ambition and the motivation to do something that looked impossible.
I couldn't think of the words. I'm sorry, he did. But the other two turned my dad down, and my dad had the vision just by standing on that lot. And just standing there and envisioning what kind of house he could have up there without having any walls.
Do you remember? I mean,
I was too young. I know that they moved into the house in 1960, and I was born 1960 in March, and they moved in summer, so I was just a toddler.
So you got to grow up in this house.
I did.
Now, I've been to the house, Shary, and it is just insane, but it is really still hanging off the side of a cliff. I mean, these drop-offs really drop. I mean, the idea of child safety is nowhere present. So
Nope, nowhere present.
So how was it growing up there? Did you just know intuitively not to get too close to the ledge?
Well, my parents were pretty strict about that. They definitely set the ground rules. When we were younger, the first thing we had to do when we got up in the morning, before we knew how to swim, was we put on life vests. So we had life vests that were over our pajamas. Every single morning we got up and we had to wear them all day until we learned to swim.
Oh, so in case you fell in the pool.
Exactly. And then my father had to put some chain link down the hill a little bit because we used to like to play down the cliff. So he put some chain link up so we wouldn't accidentally fall all the way down. Ended up on Sunset Boulevard.
Very thoughtful of him to put up chain link fence.
I know, to save his kids.
But
it is, there's no fence around the pool. They just made sure that we learned to swim at a very young age. We had to.
It's a great example of child-proofing. I mean, you put your kid in a life vest upon waking up, and then you put chain link to keep them from rolling down the hill.
That's it.
I mean, that keeps them safe.
Yeah, but we did learn how to swim pretty young, but it just became, my parents were very strict about making sure we had our life vests on as soon as we got up.
Well, that's good. The view from this house, for those of you that have not seen the photos, and I hope you'll go Google this, is really astonishing. I mean, you were looking at, 250 degrees around?
70, I think.
270-degree view of Los Angeles. It's about, on a clear day, it's 30 miles, 40 miles?
We could actually see Catalina Island, so, yeah, on a clear day. So it's out there pretty far. It's miles, yes.
Denise, let's go back to the East Coast. So you're at Fallingwater, which is in Mill Run, Pennsylvania, also known as kind of middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. I've been there any number of times, and this was not a place where you would expect to have this masterwork, but Edgar Kaufman, who was a department store owner in Pittsburgh, chose this site and hired Wright to work on it. How did that come about?
Well, the property has a very, very long history, and in the late 1800s, it had been developed as a Masonic country club. So there were a lot of recreational activities that could take place here. There were cottages and swimming pools and tennis courts and a bowling alley and just all sorts of things. And a Masonic lodge in Pittsburgh had developed it, and they would bring their members out and they would use it for recreation. So the Kaufmans discovered the property, and they leased it for a period of time for the employees at the department store. Now, we're about 70 miles from Pittsburgh, so the employees could come by train, and they could vacation here and enjoy the fresh air and the fresh water, the cool, clear water. And if you think about what Pittsburgh was like at the time, it was the steel capital of the world. So they were leaving an environment that was very smoky and coming to fresh air and coming to nature. That was the big draw. And the Kaufmans fell in love with the property, and after a period of time in the 1920s or so, the employees stopped coming for vacation. I think that had to do with the economic conditions at the time. But the Kaufmans loved the property so much that they bought it outright. And initially they had a cabin that was very close to what is now Route 381. It's a paved highway, but back then it was a dirt road. And their cabin was called the Hangover, and it perched right at the edge of a cliff, so I'm thinking about similarities with the Stahl House. And once the highway was paved and electricity had come to the mountains, the Kaufmans decided they wanted something a little more modern, farther from the highway, closer to the waterfall, because that was the big draw. That's where they spent so much time. So they commissioned Frank Lloyd Wright to design a modest weekend house for them, and that became Fallingwater.
And by modest, this was not exactly a hut.
Well, no, and that's tongue-in-cheek. Whenever the tour guides tell that, they always tell it with a smile, and the visitors, look astonished because Fallingwater, if someone hasn't seen the house, images of it, no, it isn't close to a hut.
When Kaufman was working with Frank Lloyd Wright, I understand that he called Wright and wanted to see how far along he had come. Do you know that story?
Historically, Frank Lloyd Wright had come to the site at Bear Run to see where the Kaufmans wanted their vacation home. And then he returned to Taliesin. He requested contour maps. Mr. Kaufman sent those. But then Mr. Kaufman didn't receive any plans, and months went by. And he and some of his colleagues had gone to Milwaukee for a meeting and phoned Frank Lloyd Wright saying that they planned to drive on to Taliesin to see these drawings. Now, the apprentices tell the story that at that point when the phone call was made, nothing had been put on paper. That Frank Lloyd Wright went into the drafting room and started drawing sketches and elevations and, worked at this for the couple of hours that it took for Kaufman and his colleagues to make it from Milwaukee to Taliesin, and that whenever they arrived, and then the whole story gets very dramatic because the apprentice says that he announces to Mr. Wright that Mr. Kaufman has arrived, and Wright stands up from the table and says, "We'll bring him on in." And when Mr. Kaufman comes inside, Wright says to him, "Come see your new house." And he has these sketches done. Now, obviously, they're not working drawings, they're not finished drawings, but it's the idea, and he tells Mr. Kaufman that this is where you will do this activity, and this is where Lillian will do this, and then he says, "Let me take you on a tour of Taliesin," and so they leave, and then the apprentices work on elevations and doing some of the additional work on them so that Mr. Kaufman would have a good idea of what Frank Lloyd Wright had in mind. So it's a very dramatic story. But then there's also the quote that Frank Lloyd Wright was asked one time, "Where do you get the ideas for your drawings, for your buildings?" And he said, "I just shake them out of my sleeve." So it would seem that he was able to... Yeah, we tell that a lot on tour as well. But it would seem that, he just created the whole building within his head and then could put it on paper very quickly. So they're fun stories to tell.
Well, I know, Denise, there were engineering conflicts between Wright and Kaufman that Wright kind of bluffed his way out of in the early days. But years later, it turned out that Kaufman was right. The building had some serious problems.
Well, that's true. Of course, Frank Lloyd Wright was not an engineer himself. He depended on his son-in-law, Wes Peters, to do engineering, and then he had some other engineers working for him as well. And when the story again goes that when Edgar Kaufman saw these plans, they really weren't what he was expecting. They were very dramatic, and he was an excellent businessman, very successful, very astute, and he had his firm of engineers in Pittsburgh analyze the drawings, and they prepared a lengthy report that was sent back to him saying that they didn't feel that the house would stand, and they had all of these reasons why it wouldn't, and Edgar Sr. shared that report with Frank Lloyd Wright, who then told him that he didn't deserve to have the house.
Oh.
And, yeah, so, anybody that would question what he was doing didn't deserve.
Did Wright call him a loser or anything or like that? Or
this is before Twitter.
Before Twitter. Okay.
Yeah. We don't have anything recorded. But Edgar Jr. tells that story, and he said that the engineer's reports were duly installed in one of the walls that was going up at the time. And, of course, the house has not fallen down. But Edgar Jr. also said that at some point in time that the house will fall and that those engineers' reports will be found. And at that point, they'll be true.
So they were actually embedded in the walls?
Wow.
They were buried in one of the walls. We don't know which wall, but that is the story. Yeah.
We'll pick up a little bit later about how repairs were done a number of years ago.
Okay.
Shary, your dad and Pierre Koenig worked as a team on the house. I understand your dad did a lot of the construction and also put in tons and tons and tons of concrete to shore it up. Is that right?
That's correct. After they bought the lot, my dad would spend weekends hauling concrete blocks up or pieces of concrete up to shore up the ragged edge around the lot to increase the space and allow them a little bit more to build on. But it took a lot of concrete, and that concrete is still visible today when you come up. You can see the layers of concrete that he laid. He was taught by a friend how to do it with no concrete. It was all done by water and dirt.
Whoa.
And it's still, most of it is still there today, and it's still holding up after all these years.
If it's just water and dirt, can you call it concrete? Doesn't it need lime?
Well, I mean, there's concrete blocks, but in order for them to stay together and stay cohesive and attached and stay where they were when they were put down, he just used water and dirt.
And it's been through several earthquakes, right?
Yes. There's been several. There's been some of the blocks that have been kind of pushed out a little bit because of the earthquake. We're trying to get those put back slowly to where they were, but it does take a little bit of time to work on the concrete block wall that goes all around the property. But he would bring that up in his car all the way up in the trunk each weekend. He would work every weekend at it.
Now, this house, Shary, is characterized by these beautiful floor-to-ceiling windows. It's a pretty small house in terms of square footage, just 2 bedrooms, right?
Correct.
2 bedrooms.
2,200 square feet.
And this nice little pool area right beside it.
Mm-hmm.
This was unusual at that time, I think, both for the windows and also that it was built out of steel, right?
Correct. It was built out of those materials back then.
So where did the steel idea come from?
Basically, when my dad prepared a model of the house he wanted. And when Pierre finally came up and looked at it, he said, we cannot use traditional materials on this house. In order to get what you want, which is an unobstructed view, you have to build out of steel. And in order to hold those large, very large panes of glass, you have to have steel. Wood will not work in this situation. So that's how steel came in. And, of course, Pierre, being the steel builder, or the architect that loved to use steel and glass, he was perfect for the job.
Pierre Koenig has done a number of really fabulous houses around Los Angeles. You can see all of his residential work on our website, ncmodernist.org/Koenig. Denise, your family also gets connected with the house as well as your being the chief guide there. Tell us about your father-in-law and your uncles.
Yeah, I've got family connections in both my family and my husband's family. So my grandfather, and his name was Clyde Friend, he was a local farmer and neighbor, and he brought his team of workhorses down to the site when Fallingwater was being constructed and used them to drag stones from the quarry to the building site so the masons could build them up into walls. And then his two sons, my uncles, also worked for Kaufman's. One of them worked on the house, and the other one was Mr. Kaufman's herdsman once Mr. Kaufman purchased a neighboring farm and got into the business of dairy and had his Jersey cows. But my uncle Earl Friend, who helped build the guest house and worked for Edgar Sr. and then Edgar Jr., and then he worked for the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy for many years until he retired. And at that point, he was kept on as a consultant because in our family, he was like the historian who had such a good memory and told such wonderful stories, and he just had such a background and memory of where everything went, where the wiring was, where the plumbing was, how things were done originally, and then how they were done over the years. So he was a great resource, and of course we've captured his oral history, and he was interviewed, so he had lots of wonderful stories about being associated with Kaufman's and Fallingwater. Oh, and then my father-in-law.
Yes.
That was my late father-in-law, Ralph Miner. He was one of 10 children, and a number of his older brothers helped in the construction of Fallingwater. And then he worked for Edgar Sr. and then Edgar Jr. and then the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, and he lived on the property in the Conservancy, Edgar Jr. and the Conservancy years. So my husband, they moved here when my husband was 7, my future husband, and he grew up here on this site. So he and his sister and his parents had lots of stories to talk about living on the property in his Kaufman years and then also under the Conservancy.
Did they actually live in the house, or were there auxiliary buildings around?
Well, there were other buildings on the property. So initially they lived in what was the clubhouse, and that was a building that dated back to the Masonic era. And then whenever Mr. Kaufman Jr. was entrusting Fallingwater and the site to the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, a more modern home was built next to the clubhouse, and they moved into that. And that was a building. It's a one-story building that still stands, but Edgar Kaufman Jr. designed that, and now it's used as our commercial kitchen and storage and office space. So it's still here.
Shary, your house has been famous for a long time, but it was Julius Schulman's photograph that kind of put it on the cultural map.
Yes, his photograph definitely made an impact throughout the world, and especially in other countries and in the United States. Also, just with my parents opening the house the way they did to photography shoots, film shoots, anybody that stopped by and wanted to see the house, my parents were always welcoming people in, and especially students. Students were near and dear to my parents' hearts. They felt like these are the architectural students of the next generation. It's important that they learn. And so she would never close the door on anybody. She always let them come in and just sit down and talk with them and just enjoy the space. We do that now, but unfortunately we can't. We have to do it in a more structured environment. Yes. By arranging for tours. Because of the popularity, we just couldn't keep up with the influx of people. And we have to be very respectful of our neighbors. It is on a private road, a private gated road, and we have to be, like I said, respectful of our neighbors and make sure that it's done very scheduled and handled properly.
Right. There's no parking up there.
Well, we actually have 4 parking spots on the property, and we have 2 down the road.
Okay.
So we have 6. So that's why our tours are somewhat limited, and we have to schedule them as soon as we reach 6 cars. We have to sell the tour out because we can't have anybody parking on someone else's property that's on that private road.
And is there a gate now? Because I think when I went there before, there wasn't a gate.
It was probably propped open. We usually will prop it open sometimes during tours, but usually that gate is closed.
Okay.
Yes, it was probably propped open. You didn't notice it as you were coming up the road. You were probably looking at the view because it was pretty from off east, looking eastways.
The house had its first starring role in the movie Smog in 1962, so that's just within a year or two of completion. Right. They were approached, and they decided to use the house for that movie. And then it's just been increasing
from then on. It's always been in the studio commercial business. It always has, since 1962. And you mentioned Galaxy Quest, and that's probably one of my favorite movies ever shot up there. My mother loved it. She fell in love with the aliens, and she just had the best time with that whole crew. She said they were so wonderful to work with.
Well, the movie really stars the house. I mean, it's not an incidental player in that film.
Right, being Tim Allen's house, it's just so fun, and it's definitely, Galaxy Quest is definitely, it's so bad you love it, you know what I mean?
Yes, yeah.
It's just one of my all-time favorites up there, and my parents thoroughly enjoyed that one. I know during Why Do Fools Fall in Love, they were, I don't know if you remember or have seen that movie, but when the house was completely destroyed inside.
No, I don't remember that.
Oh my gosh, yeah, you should watch it. My mother was very nervous during that time because they made it look like it was no one was living there. The house was boarded up, everything was wrecked, curtains were torn down, and it was just dirt all over the place in the pool in the house, and that made her a little nervous. She wasn't sure what was going to come out of that after it was finished, but they brought the house back to what it was. But it was interesting if you ever watched that movie. It kind of made her heart skip a beat a few times.
Now, as kids growing up in the house, did you get to meet any celebrities or directors of the TV and movies that would come through?
We did, especially as kids. It was exciting for us to be around that whole set. It was, having all these people come into your house and trying to stay out of the way, but you meet people and you're meeting actors and actresses. And I think my favorite at the time when I was young was Columbo, because Peter Falk was just the nicest man, especially to us. And he never acted like we were in his way or anything. And then there's been quite a few lovely people that have come up, directors included, and actors and actresses that, you'd never expect to be that nice, but they all are. They're very, very appreciative to be up there.
Brad Pitt has visited the house, correct?
The word is Brad Pitt has visited, but we didn't know about it. He came in as part of the crew.
Oh, really?
He snuck in.
That's what I understand. I don't know. I've never met him up there. Neither has my brother. And there hasn't been a photography shoot up there with him, but I've heard through the grapevine that he has been up there.
Did he carve his initials into one of the steel beams?
I don't know. I'm going to have to go look around.
They would have shot him if he did that.
Yeah.
I know. I haven't seen that. I mean, I would love to have him up, but I believe he has been up. I think he came up on a film shoot.
Well, I think besides Brad Pitt, maybe Kelly Lynch is the best known celebrity
right.
who loves modernist architecture.
Right. You know who else is, I believe Will Ferrell's wife is very much into architecture. They come up. I'm trying to think who else, but I know Brad Pitt for sure.
Now, Denise, Brad Pitt's been to Fallingwater, I know.
Yes, that's true.
Because it made the papers a number of years ago.
Yes, it did. I remember reading about it.
Did you get to tour him and Angelina around?
I did not. That was so top secret. I've never seen anything that was so hush-hush as when he came to Fallingwater. She had made the reservations in advance. She wanted to treat him to a tour of Fallingwater for his birthday, and that was in December. Yeah, so they flew into Latrobe, and one of our staff drove to Latrobe and brought them back here to Fallingwater, and they had their private tour in the house. And then they went down to the View and allowed our staff person to take a photograph of them, just one photograph. And then that was released to the press after they had left the site. And honestly, it went around the world. We got copies of newspapers from other countries with Brad and Angelina on the cover. And that was a really big deal.
I bet.
Now, if you are at Fallingwater, what she referred to as the View is a short walk down this kind of woodsy path to get the classic scene of the water and the house in the background, and you can stand there and it's behind you. You'll see 1,000 shots like this on Facebook, but it is the classic pose. And Brad and Angelina didn't originate it, but they copied it.
Wow.
Yes, that's true. We sometimes call it the iconic view, and if you would go to our website, which is fallingwater.org, we have a webcam, and that is focused right on the view, or on, the view that you see from that location, and it's the house hovering over the waterfall, and it's instantly recognizable.
So you'll know if they ever come back because it'll be on the webcam.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
Has anybody ever shot a film at Fallingwater?
No, well, yes, but let me qualify that. Many people come to Fallingwater thinking that the Alfred Hitchcock film North by Northwest was filmed in part here. And if you watch the film, there is a very modern house in the film, but it's certainly not Fallingwater, and it's not cantilevered like Fallingwater is. So we sometimes get into discussions with visitors that no, North by Northwest was not filmed here. But there was a small film that was done, and I think it was called The Journey. I never saw it, but it was some sort of a small, tiny film, and part of it was filmed here, and I don't even know where it was released, but that's been it. We've had a lot of commercials that have been filmed here, both media and print, but not moving pictures.
I've seen a lot of commercials with the Stahl House, but never one of Fallingwater. Is there anybody currently that's using that?
No, not that I know of.
Okay. Shary, we've seen a lot of documentaries about Fallingwater. Are there any documentaries on the Stahl House?
There is not at this point.
Okay. Are there some coming?
I'm not sure on the documentary part. Would love to do that. I know that we're hoping as well to work on a family book.
Okay.
That we would like to work on first. And I'm not sure whether documentary will be coming, but it would be nice to do.
We've had a bunch of documentary filmmakers on the show. And I remember one of them asking me about that house because he's done, I guess, 6 or 7 of them before. It's Jake Gorst. Jake Gorst. You can Google him on IMDb. He's kind of the Steven Spielberg of architecture documentaries. He's done a ton of them. We've had him as a guest.
Let me write that down. You said Jake?
Jake Gorst. Gorst.
I know that name's familiar.
It is familiar. You've probably seen one of his films.
I'm sure I have.
And if you do something with it, we want tickets to the premiere.
Yes. We became friends with Eric Bricker that did the Julius Schulman documentary. Yes, he's wonderful.
Now, Shary, I understand you're doing some kind of deal with Design Within Reach. Is that right?
Actually, we've had a deal with them for quite a few years now.
What do they do with the house?
They stage the house for us with furniture from Design Within Reach and various designers. And they usually change it out to like every couple of years. And it works out really well because the furniture always looks really nice when it does come in. And then if they change it out, then they bring the newest designs in, which is nice as well.
There's one famous chair in the corner. Could you tell us about that?
The famous chair?
The one in the corner of the house that everyone sits in and has their picture taken?
Oh, when they come up on tours.
Yeah.
Well, everybody has to get the Julius Schulman picture with themselves in it. So everybody makes it to that famous corner in a chair that whatever the Design Within Reach chair is at the time, they sit there and they have to have their Julius Schulman picture taken there. They have to have that. And some actually recreate it with 2 ladies, and it's really quite fun to see. I see it on Instagram a lot and Facebook.
So this is the corner bright hanging over the skyline, all glass. Yeah.
And they all have to have that done. And I think it's so fun to watch people when they come up. I just enjoy it. I enjoy the people that come and visit us. And they come from all over.
All over the world.
All over the world. And some can't even speak English, but they know the house.
Well, and I know you encourage people to visit the house, but then again, nothing goes on forever. What happens to the house in, say, the next 50 years? Does it go not-for-profit? Does it go on the market? I mean, I'll buy it right now.
That's hard to say. Right now, we want to keep it in the family. But, who knows what the future holds. But right now, it's going to stay with the family.
Okay.
And hopefully keep it open for people to visit, as long as we possibly can.
How do people make arrangements to do a visit, Shary?
They go on our website at stallhouse.com. And then they can make a reservation on the visits tab.
Okay.
And then they can go in and select a tour. We do sell out about a month and a half ahead of time. We get sold out pretty quickly because, like we were talking about earlier, we're limited on the amount of cars we can have. We have 6 parking spots, and that's it. So a tour can get sold out rather quickly. Our evening tours are the most popular because you get to see some daylight, and then you get to be up there and watch the view during sunset, and then as it turns into night, it's really spectacular up there. And the evening tours does seem to be the favorite.
And these run all the time?
Yes, we do close down about a month and a half every year to do a renovation project. So the money that comes in from these tours, we then keep that, and then we save it for our next renovation project. So we'll be closing probably January, February next year. We need to start working on the bathrooms and doing some work back there, but we're slowly renovating it.
Isn't it true it's always the bathrooms?
Well, I want to do the kitchen, but that's going to take a little more thought, and that's next on our list because I really want that kitchen redone. But I think for our next one, we will be working on the bathrooms, yes, and they do need some help back there. It's still original from my parents as far as the old cabinets, and we got to just refinish them and bring them back.
Denise, the original cost, and you correct me if any of these numbers are off, but I have the original estimated cost for Fallingwater was $35,000, and the final cost was about $155,000. From 1938 to 41, about $22,000 more was spent, ending up with about $155,000 total, which is equivalent to about $2.7 million. But in 2001, a little repair work had to be done. What happened there?
Well, the house had been deflecting, and some of that happened originally. When the house was constructed, they poured the cantilevers level, and they should have canted them upwards to allow for the initial deflection, but that didn't happen. So there was an initial deflection of up to 3 inches, but over the years, the house continued to deflect. And at the point where we started investigating it, one of the corners was off about 5 inches from the horizontal, and the other was off about 7 inches. And when I'm talking about corners, I'm talking about the very edges of the living room terraces that are cantilevered. So a firm of engineers, Robert Silman and Associates, looked at the problem, and there was a long period of non-destructive testing that went on to determine just what the problem was. And the final conclusion was that the house was under-engineered. So that goes back to what we were talking about earlier with Frank Lloyd Wright and Edgar Sr. And, it was obvious that the house was deflecting for all these years, and there was always the discussion, was it caused because of Frank Lloyd Wright not specifying enough steel, or was it caused because Edgar Sr. made the decision that more steel should be added? And was, the extra weight, just what was the problem that caused this? So the final result was that the house was under-engineered, and then Silman came up with a plan to do a steel cable post-tensioning process, and that was done in the fall of 2001 and the spring of 2002. And they inserted steel cables into the floor of the first floor and post-tensioned them, and the beauty of the project was it's invisible. Once everything was put back in place, you don't see anything from the inside, you don't see anything from the outside, but the house has been stabilized and hasn't deflected since, and they don't anticipate any deflection in the future. There weren't any plans to correct the deflection. It still is drooping on both ends, but it is stabilized. And that was just a very interesting process to be here, watching the non-destructive testing, watching the post-tensioning happen, and now, talking about the positive results that we have.
And so for those of our listeners who aren't engineers, deflecting sort of means sinking, right?
Yeah, and sometimes we just say sagging. When we're talking, to our students, we talk about how it sags or deflects, yeah.
And the post-tensioning is basically where you're kind of driving a big screw in the rock and then tightening it so it pulls the house back into the embankment? Is that how that works?
No, not really.
Okay.
What they did was, and I don't want to get too technical, and we do have more information on our website, but they...
well, we're idiots, so just talk to us like we're in third grade.
Well, but it's hard to do without my hands. You can't see my hands as I'm doing this. But they created anchor blocks of concrete next to the concrete beams in the first floor, and then these cables went through plastic conduits and were attached to the anchor blocks, and then they extended out through the exterior wall, and that's where they were tightened. So by putting the steel cables in tension, it put the concrete beams in compression, and that made everything more stable. So if you think about suspension bridges that are made of steel cables, it's kind of the same idea there.
Or like those little toys you used to have where you could press the button on the bottom and the little clown would go all limp. But when you let go of the button, the clown kind of snapped back up into shape.
Yeah, I remember those.
Or am I getting a little too,
No, I can picture.
Yeah.
I can picture that. That works for me.
Yeah. So it's like a big clown.
Yes,
House.
welcome to Engineering 101, our
Sure.
seminar
Always glad to help.
on US Modernist Radio. Denise, Fallingwater is not the only Frank Lloyd Wright house in your area. If people come to visit you, what other houses are nearby?
Well, closest to us is Kentuck Knob, and that was built for the Hagen family about 25 years after Fallingwater. It's a beautiful house at a beautiful location, and it's currently owned by Lord Peter Palumbo from England, and it is open for tours, so they might want to go see that. And then more recently, a house that was originally built in Illinois, in Lisle, Illinois, called the Duncan House, was deconstructed and moved to a town that's about 25 miles from here, and it was reconstructed. So that house is available for touring, and it's also available for people to spend the night. As much as they'd like to spend the night in Fallingwater, that doesn't happen, but they could stay at the Duncan House and then come visit us. And the Duncan House is in an area called Polymath Park, where there are two houses that were designed by a Wright apprentice, Peter Bernstein. So those houses can be visited, and also you could stay in those. And then there's yet another house coming that's a Frank Lloyd Wright house that I'm not sure what state it was from. It might be Minnesota. But it's at Polymath Park, and they're reconstructing it. So once it's, up, there will be two Frank Lloyd Wright houses at Polymath Park, and then Kentuck Knob, and then Fallingwater, all within about 40 minutes total. And visitors could just come see all of them. And when you were talking earlier about commercials, there is a Fallingwater commercial that you could go and look at on YouTube that's very interesting. It was made some years ago, but it's a BMW commercial. And what they were illustrating was, what if art wasn't here? And there's a clip of a Jackson Pollock painting that's being rained on and looks like it's being ruined. And I don't remember right now what the other art object was, but they show falling water in all of its beauty over the waterfall. And then a wrecking ball comes into the scene and it crashes into Fallingwater's cantilever.
Ugh.
It's very dramatic.
Good thing they had those cables.
But of course, it's not real. It's all computer generated. But yeah, you could just go to YouTube and look up Fallingwater BMW commercial, and it will make you pause when you see the wrecking ball.
Well, Shary and Denise, thank you so much for being on with us at US Modernist this week. You did great. We loved having you.
Thank you very much.
It was my pleasure. Yeah, I want to go out and see the Stahl House so badly now.
I know. I haven't been to Fallingwater yet, and I really need to go.
Okay, it sounds like 2 dates are getting lined up.
I think so. Absolutely.
Well, please let us know when you're coming, Shary, and we'll give you a special tour.
Vice versa.
Yeah, Denise, you'll want to sneak in as a member of the crew out in L.A., just sort of under the radar.
Brad Pitt
like
style.
Brad Pitt style, yeah.
No, I'll fly out and have her come in.
Well, thank you both.
Thank you so much.
Okay, you're so welcome.
Thanks ever so much for listening. US Modernist Radio is underwritten by Sarah Sonk, your real estate angel sent down to help us mere mortals who are shopping for heavenly modernist houses. You can reach her at 919-601-7339. Okay, Tom, take us out.
Visit USModernist.org for more information about today's show. US Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our wonderful theme song was performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl.
Woohoo!
Cindy the Mole Stratton researches guests in her pajamas from her secret underground bunker. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of North Carolina Modernist Houses, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild, and George and Frank and I somehow will be back in 2 weeks with another edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.